Hi, my name is Lindsay Gutierrez, and I am honored to share my leadership vision and practicum work with Donor Outreach for Veterans, also known as DOVE. As a Doctor of Social Work student at the University of Louisville, I have the privilege of applying my leadership philosophy and practice through a project that builds both organizational capacity and community empowerment. This presentation is designed to illustrate how my leadership philosophy comes alive in real-world practice, specifically within DOVE's work with living organ donors and veterans. I will share how my values and approaches guide transformative leadership, highlight how equity and inclusion are central to this vision, and demonstrate how my professional brand reflects the principles I lead with. My goal is to inspire confidence in both the direction of this practicum and my identity as a social work leader. My leadership philosophy is grounded in the values of service, compassion, justice, accountability, and community. These values reflect both my personal journey as a veteran and a living donor and my professional identity as a social worker. They are expressed most clearly through servant leadership, which prioritizes the growth, well-being, and empowerment of others, and adaptive leadership, which emphasizes resilience and creativity when facing complex challenges. Together, servant leadership and adaptive leadership models ensure that my leadership is both people-centered and flexible. The philosophy is also guided by key social work theories. Systems theory reminds me that individuals do not exist in isolation. They are part of families, organizations, and communities, all of which must be considered when creating equitable solutions. This aligns with adaptive leadership as it requires responsiveness to dynamic environments and multiple perspectives. Empowerment theory provides a second foundation, emphasizing the importance of strengthening individual and community capacity while dismantling barriers to participation. This directly complements servant leadership, as both approaches prioritize uplifting others and promoting self-determination. By grounding my leadership in these theories, I ensure that my practice is not only values-driven, but also theoretically sound. In social work, I believe leadership is not about hierarchy, but about responsibility. Leaders in our field are called to act with integrity, to ensure that marginalized voices are elevated, and to hold ourselves accountable to those we serve. Leadership isn't a title, it's a practice of service and advocacy. For me, this means blending my lived experiences with my professional expertise. My background as a veteran, spouse, and living organ donor allows me to understand the systems and barriers people face in deeply personal ways. At the same time, my social work training equips me to translate those experiences into equitable, systemic solutions. This dual perspective allows me to lead in ways that are authentic, informed, and equity-centered. Dove empowers civilians and veterans to serve their communities through living organ donation. The organization's mission is to support those who donate, the veteran recipients, and their families, recognizing that organ donation is an extraordinary act of service that deserves visibility, recognition, and support. However, significant gaps remain in how donors are cared for and supported over the long term. For example, Adams Leander found that African American donors often experience discrimination, financial burdens, and a lack of culturally competent care. These inequities mirror broader challenges faced in the transplant system and underscore the need for organizations like DOVE, which work to ensure that the donors, especially those from marginalized groups, are seen, supported, and celebrated. My practicum focuses on strengthening the Armed Forces Transplant Team as we prepare for the Transplant Games of America. Key activities include creating safe communication systems, developing an intake form to track participation, organizing team rosters, building a fundraising page, and designing a wellness roadmap. These activities may look procedural, but they are fundamentally about equity and empowerment. Research supports this approach. Davis and colleagues demonstrate how storytelling builds community, reduces stigma, and empowers donors and recipients. By creating tools and systems that make space for veterans' voices and experiences, I am helping to ensure their stories are recognized and their contributions valued. This focus on connection and visibility reflects my belief that leadership and social work is about creating conditions where people can thrive. My leadership approach emphasizes engaging and empowering all stakeholders. For staff, that means cultivating transparency and shared decision-making so everyone feels ownership of the mission. For veterans and families, it means building culturally responsive, evidence-based systems of support that address not just medical needs, but also emotional and social realities. This approach is supported by research. Davis and colleagues highlight how sharing lived experiences allows donors and recipients to feel seen and empowered while also breaking down stigma. By fostering peer mentorship networks and collaboration among veterans, I hope to replicate this dynamic within Dove, creating spaces where people can connect and strengthen one another through their shared journeys. The outcomes I anticipate from this practicum include the development of improved visibility for the Armed Forces Transplant Team, more equitable supports for diverse donors and families, and stronger veteran donor support networks. These communities of support connect living donors with one another, with recipients and with their families, and of course with the broader community. They foster peer mentorship, reduce isolation, and provide spaces where donors can share their lived experiences, challenges, and triumphs. In many ways, they act as a safety net, ensuring that donors have ongoing emotional, social, and informational support well beyond the medical procedure itself. These outcomes not only benefit individuals, but also strengthen Dove's organizational capacity and sustainability. Additionally, the networks also serve to amplify visibility for the Armed Forces Transplant Team, making the stories and contributions of veteran donors more widely recognized. At the same time, they strengthen equity by ensuring diverse donors, such as veterans of color, LGBTQIA+ service members, and those from low-income backgrounds, are fully included and represented. In building systems that are transparent, inclusive, and data-informed, I am helping Dove lay a foundation not just for individual success, but for organizational sustainability. These outcomes reflect both my leadership philosophy and the mission of social work to promote dignity, justice, and empowerment for those who give so much of themselves. No leadership plan is without challenges. At Dove, we face limited resources, the complexity of coordinating across multiple agencies, the risk of burnout among staff and volunteers, and the broader resistance to systemic change. These are real barriers that must be acknowledged and addressed. Importantly, some of these challenges are systemic. Liu, Norman, and Doshi remind us that disparities in transplantation are not about individual choice, but about structural racism and inequities embedded in our systems. Recognizing these barriers means committing to adaptive leadership, such as finding innovative and collaborative solutions, while keeping equity at the forefront of every decision. My leadership approach to equity begins with centering marginalized voices. That means actively prioritizing the perspectives of racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA+ donors, and women veterans whose experiences are often underrepresented in both research and practice. Adams Leander reminds us that African American living donors, for example, frequently face discrimination and lack of support. By intentionally creating spaces where marginalized donors can share their stories and influence organizational direction, I ensure that equity is not a side note, but a driving principle. Equity also requires building systems of accountability and shared leadership, where outcomes are not driven solely by top-down decisions, but shaped collaboratively. Culturally responsive and evidence-based practices are central to this work, such as meeting donors and families where they are while honoring the cultural, social, and personal context they bring. Finally, true equity requires long-term advocacy for systemic reform. As Liu and colleagues note, structural racism continues to shape transplant systems. By engaging in advocacy at the policy and community levels, I aim to help dismantle these barriers so that equity is sustained far beyond the scope of this practicum. My professional brand is defined by my identity as a veteran, a living organ donor, and a social work leader. These identities ground me in service while giving me credibility and authenticity in advocating for systemic change. The pillars of my brand are equity, service, and transformation. Equity ensures fairness and justice guide my work. Service reminds me to put others first. Transformation reflects my vision for creating lasting systemic change. My leadership presence reflects these pillars by being grounded in my values, accountable to my commitments, and innovative in my solutions. To align my professional presence with my leadership brand, I updated my LinkedIn profile. My headline communicates clearly who I am and what I stand for: a DSW student, a veteran, and a social work leader advancing equity for donors and military families. My About section further describes my philosophy of service, compassion, and accountability. This alignment matters. It ensures that whether I am presenting to stakeholders, working with Dove, or connecting online, my professional brand reflects the same equity-centered vision. This consistency strengthens trust and credibility with diverse audiences. Leadership is more than what we say or how we present ourselves in front of an audience. It's about how we represent ourselves visually. A clear, consistent, and professional design communicates trust and accountability before a word is ever spoken. For this presentation, I chose imagery that reflects both my veteran and healthcare identities. I also incorporated icons representing my values of service, compassion, justice, and accountability. These visuals reinforce the narrative of equity-centered leadership and connect my professional identity to the mission of Dove. My call to action is simple yet powerful. No donor should be unseen, no veteran unsupported, and no community left behind. This call reflects both Dove's mission and my personal leadership philosophy. It is also an invitation. I invite you, administrators, staff, community partners, and service users to join me in building systems that celebrate, sustain, and empower those who give the gift of life. You're encouraged to visit our website at www.dovetransplant.org or visit our Facebook team at U.S. Armed Forces Transplant Team. We're always looking for people to support us in many ways, and we hope you will join our mission for lasting change. Together, we can create communities of care that truly reflect the values of equity and justice. The next steps in this practicum are vast. I will complete the deliverables we set, such as creating communication systems, intake forms, fundraising tools, and a wellness roadmap, among many other areas of interest. These deliverables will serve as the building blocks for Dove's and the Armed Forces Transplant Team's ongoing success. Beyond these tasks, I will continue to engage stakeholders in collaborative processes that share ownership of the mission. I will also work with leadership to ensure sustainability so the Armed Forces Transplant Team and Dove as a whole can continue growing long after this practicum is complete. As I close this presentation, I want to thank you for your time, attention, and your shared commitment to equity, inclusion, and transformative leadership. My leadership philosophy is grounded in service, compassion, justice, accountability, and community. Values that not only guide my professional practice, but also reflect who I am as a person, a veteran, and a living organ donor. Through this practicum with Dove, I have the opportunity to live these values in action by creating structures that connect people, empower voices, and strengthen systems of care. It's an honor to align my personal experiences with my personal mission and my professional work in ways that can make a real difference. Looking forward, I see this work not as a finite project, but as a much larger movement. Together with Dove and with partners like you, we can ensure that every donor is supported, every recipient valued, and every community empowered. This call to action is not just about strengthening systems, but about uplifting lives, honoring sacrifices, and advancing equity across all communities. I welcome your feedback, your collaboration, and your partnership as we move forward in this important work, and I look forward to continuing this journey together.